So next up is a session all about EIS, VC, and tax in 2026. Can everyone hear me okay, by the way? Got it. I know it's quite echoey in here. Please, if at any point you can't hear me, please just put your hands up. So my name is Christiana Stewart-Lockhart. I am Director General of the EIS Association. We are the trade body for the Enterprise Investment Scheme and Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme. Can I just double check, just so I can get a sense of things? Could you put your hand up if you have heard about EIS and SEIS and know what they are? Fantastic, really good start. Can you keep your hand up if you have invested through them before? Okay, very helpful, thank you. So as the trade body, we represent the whole ecosystem. So we have members who are entrepreneurs, we have members who are advisors, lawyers, accountants, and then we also have the investors and fund managers, wealth managers as well. We do three main things. So we do a lot around education. I'm pleased to say in this room there's a pretty high proportion of people who have heard about the schemes, but across the country that is definitely not the case. And so we're doing a lot around raising awareness. The second thing we do is regulatory updates, technical updates, events for our members. We do a lot of networking events, including founder and investor networking. And we also have our annual Easter Awards, which is a real highlight, which is happening next month at the House of Lords. We've just closed entries for this year, so the all-important judging process is going on at the moment. And then the third thing we do is we represent the ecosystem to government. So Katie, who was speaking before, we often meet with Katie, others in the Treasury, HMRC, making sure that the schemes are working as effectively as possible. So that's really who we are and what we do. Today, I'm talking to you a little bit about the schemes, where they are, where they're going, and key data. And one of the things that is great is HMRC release data around EIS every year in May. We've actually got the next set of data coming out in a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, this conference is just before it rather than just after it, but I'll do my best to give you the data I have. And it's worth saying as well that the data is normally a year behind. So the most recent data we have is 2023-24. The data coming out later this month will be 2024-25. So what are some of the key things about EIS when it comes to data that you need to know? Well, first of all, this is not a minor scheme. Katie actually mentioned SEIS and EIS just as I came in earlier, so that was very good timing. But this is £34 billion has been invested through the EIS and SEIS since they were created. So really, really significant. And that has been invested into just under 60,000 businesses. Now, I'm pretty sure the numbers have exceeded that now. As I said, we'll get the data later this month. And these have a huge impact on the country. So there are nearly, in 2023 alone, there were nearly 400,000 jobs across the UK at EIS-backed companies. And then what's also really interesting is Bohus did some research as part of the 30th anniversary of the EIS, which was a couple of years ago, and nearly half of all UK unicorns were EIS-backed. So again, really, really significant in terms of the role these schemes are playing in the economy. So the EIS was created by the government, launched, as I said, just over 30 years ago, to address this gap in that it was very, very difficult for early stage businesses to get investment. And through a number of different tax reliefs, they've been very, very successful at addressing this gap. It's also wonderful that a couple of years ago, the government extended the EIS and VCTs for 10 years. So now those schemes are set to last until 2035. Which is brilliant. Moving on to my next slide. I mentioned the statistic about UK unicorns. The companies that have benefited from EIS are all around. People in this room probably use them day to day. I know that even before I've taken my kids to school in the morning, I've probably engaged with about 5 different EIS investee companies. So really important to appreciate the impact it's having. You can see there some of the stats around the turnover being 192 billion, which is pretty incredible, and exits by EIS-backed companies. And then, of course, very important, the amount going to businesses with a female founder or co-founder. as I mentioned, these companies are all around, just to name a few, and there are many, many more, but Just Eat, Depop, Monzo, Revolut, Zoopla, it goes on, Lucky Saint, many others. So these are really important companies making a big difference in the UK economy. And I've just named the kind of household brands you might have heard of, let alone the ones working behind the scenes to really make an impact, whether that's in life sciences or B2B SaaS or whatever it may be, climate tech, many different things. So then in terms of what these schemes actually are, what I often find is when I speak to people about EIS and SEIS, a lot of people have heard about the income tax relief, 30% for EIS, 50% for SEIS, but very few fully understand all the different reliefs available. So as you can see from the slide, for both schemes, there is no CGT on the investment if it does well. For EIS, you've got CGT deferral. For SEIS, that's actually 50% CGT relief. There's also loss relief if the business fails. And then inheritance tax, a potential relief for the first 2.5 million of qualifying assets, and then 50% reduction after that. So as you can see, pretty powerful mix of tax reliefs there, which is one of the things that make these schemes world-leading, and they genuinely are world-leading. So now what companies qualify? Not all companies qualify. There has to be genuine risk to the capital, but you can see there some of the requirements in terms of the size and age of the company, number of employees, things like that. We also have all of these details and free guides on our website as well, which is esa.org.uk. So then looking into the data a bit more, the last few years, it's been a bit of a mixed picture for EIS. The numbers have actually, the amount raised has actually been falling since there was a record-breaking high in 2021-22. But you can still see that there's still a significant amount being raised, 1.5 billion for the most recent data we have, nearly 4,000 companies as well. And one of the statistics, which you'll see right at the bottom on the right-hand corner there of the slides, is the number of people who invested through the EIS in 23-24. And this is something I find really interesting, because as you'll see, it was just over 35,000. I think this could be so much bigger, and this is where I think we have a real challenge with a knowledge and awareness gap. And it's something we're doing a lot of work to address. I mentioned the education piece at the beginning, but I regularly come across individuals, often who have worked in the city or had a background in finance, who have never ever come across EIS or SEIS, and they normally come across it maybe when they're starting their own businesses. Our chair is a woman called Joanna Jensen. She founded a company called Child's Farm. I've used that with my children. Anyone with children in the room might be familiar with the brand. It is the leading children's toiletries brand in the UK. But she worked in the city before starting that and had never heard of EIS and SEIS. So this is where we're trying to raise awareness, but I'd also ask everyone in the room to really try and also spread the word about it. Many of you will have probably seen there was an FT article at the start of this year saying that this year is going to be the first year that there'll be 2 million people earning six figures in the UK. Now, I'm not suggesting that all 2 million people earning six figures should be investing through the EIS and SEIS. Obviously, these are high-risk investments. They are illiquid. It's important to mention that. But I do think it shows the significant opportunity for growth in this area and the difference it could make. I really find the regions and devolved nations aspect fascinating, because you can see this was data that was done by Bohurst as part of the 30th anniversary. But you can see the significant growth there's been across the UK in the last 10 years in both jobs and turnover for EIS-backed companies. And as I mentioned, there's nearly in 2023 alone, there were nearly 400,000 people employed by EIS-backed businesses. I'm not going to read all of the stats out there, but you can see just how significant the growth is, and that it's been felt across the whole of the UK. And we do have well-established hubs now in Manchester and Edinburgh. I was in Edinburgh last week, Manchester earlier this week, and they are really thriving. But it's also great to see kind of further afield in less typical places, whether that's in the southwest and the northeast, significant growth in this area too. So I mentioned before the number of people investing through the schemes every year, just over 35,000 in the most recent year we have data for. One of the things I find fascinating is the size of investment. And this is all data from HMRC. And you can see from this that nearly half of everyone investing through the EIS each year are investing £10,000 or less. And I think that's a very different figure to what most people would guess before they'd seen this data. Obviously, this does include kind of crowdfunding platforms and things like that, so it's anyone investing through the EIS, but I find it really interesting to see the spread that most people investing through the schemes are actually investing an amount that is accessible to a much wider number of people, but also the numbers investing at the larger scales are smaller than I think many would assume. I've also got the stat there about the 2 million people earning £100,000 or more, which I think really highlights the awareness gap and opportunity in this space. So I mentioned some of the different companies that have benefited from the EIS, and many of these are household names, whether that's Just Eat, Monzo, I mentioned Revolut, Zoopla, Depop before, Bloom and Wild, Gusto, Charlotte Tilbury. There's many, many different companies that you will probably come across in your day-to-day lives. But there are also a lot of companies you probably won't have heard of. Casino Tech, based in Scotland, is using 3D printing to print and test cancer drugs. There's Genome Diagnostics creating a new blood test to diagnose ovarian cancer and rolling that out to other cancers too. That's based in Belfast. There are some incredible companies here in the UK doing amazing things thanks to these schemes. And I think one of the things that is really rewarding for me, given my job, is meeting many of these founders and almost all of them saying they don't think they would be where they are today without the investment through the SCIS or EIS, and just how important those schemes have been in their growth journey. You can see as well, nearly 80,000 patents were filed by EIS-backed companies in that 10-year period between 2014 and 2023, and also kind of the what I mentioned about a lot of activity, not just within the Golden Triangle in the southeast, but beyond as well. So now we talk about the SEIS reforms and their impact. So these came in April 2023. These were really, really brilliant to see. And one of the things I was especially happy about was the shift in age limit. So prior to this, to use SEIS as a company, you had to be less than 2 years old. As most of us sitting in this room probably know, 2 years goes quite quickly. For a business, that's quite fast to get to a position where you're ready for investment, have actually made those connections, done the had the conversations, and so that actually increased to 3 years. And what was amazing to see is in the Northeast alone, the number of companies benefiting from the SEIS went up 81%. So really, really significant changes, and great to see the impact it's had. You will also see from that slide that the amount invested through the SEIS went up 51%. So I think this is a real growth area, and it's really exciting to see so much more activity in this space. I've also mentioned at the bottom the Commission study, the European Commission study that I mentioned before. They did a study of all the schemes of this kind across the world and found that the SEIS was the #1 most successful and the EIS was the #2 most successful. Katie and others probably know. Thank you. I think that deserves a round of applause. And we've had governments from France, Canada. I had someone contact me, Mexico. I had someone contacted me yesterday about a government in South America wanting to meet. Genuinely governments from all over the world coming to the UK to study these schemes and understand how they work because they have been so successful. And I think against a backdrop of slightly kind of less positive rhetoric about the UK, I think that's really, really important to acknowledge that we are world leading when it comes to this space. So The other big change, I talked about the SEIS changes that came in 2023. The other really big change came in just last month, and it was one of the big success stories from the budget in last November. So for the first time in over a decade, the government have actually increased the amounts that companies are able to raise through the schemes, both their annual investment limits and their lifetime limits, and they have doubled. And you may be familiar that there are kind of two types of EIS companies and two types of limits that apply. One, you have the kind of standard EIS, as it were, and then you also have something called a knowledge-intensive company. This is essentially a company doing a lot of R&D, often very IP-rich, often with quite a skilled workforce. And these types of companies benefit from much higher investment limits due to the recognition that they can take longer to grow, that often take longer to generate revenue. We're talking very much in this case about life sciences, deep tech. They will dominate a lot of the companies in this space. But really, really fantastic to see. Obviously, it's very early days. We're only a couple of weeks in still. So it will be interesting to see the impact of this when it comes through in the data. But I think the main thing to take away here is that EIS and VCT, because these limits apply to VCT as well, are now much better able to support scale-ups, and this really strengthens the UK position when it comes to scale-ups and supporting companies beyond that Series A stage. And that's something where I think there was a sort of rhetoric or a feeling that to do a Series A or beyond, you had to find international capital, and it was very hard to do it in the UK. And this is hopefully going to significantly change that and address that scale-up gap. So, what's the outlook and green shoots? I am incredibly positive about EIS this year. You saw from some of the previous slides, it has been falling recently, but I think there are a mixture of different things that are making this year a really exciting one for EIS. Obviously, the changes to the limits that I just talked about that came in last month, but also I think the awareness is starting to really grow. We've seen that with SEIS. We've seen a significant increase in SEIS, which is helping the pipeline coming through. But the potential in terms of the number of people that could be investing that aren't currently, and I think also combined with this changes more broadly to pensions and IHT and VCT tax relief, I think people are taking greater interest in EIS than maybe didn't really know that much about it before. So I think there's immense opportunity. I also think we need to big up the UK a lot more. I think this is an incredible country. We are a great place to start and grow a business. I think particularly with the wider geopolitical situation that's going on, it's really emphasizing just how good the UK is, and we're looking like a pretty stable, promising place to start and grow a business compared to a lot of other places in the world. And we have an incredible talent here. You know, I haven't even talked about university spin-outs are incredibly important for EIS and universities in the UK. And that is not just in Oxford and Cambridge, which obviously have huge strength here. But, you know, earlier this week I was speaking to Newcastle University. There are a lot of universities across the UK where we are world leading, and some of the science and innovations that are coming out are really important. So that's the presentation. I want to say thank you. I'm happy to take some questions as well. But just before I do, if you want to know more, our website is esa.org.uk. We have a knowledge hub on there with free guides. We have regular webinars. We have an accreditation. And for any founders who you're working with, or if there are any founders in the room as well, we have a members directory with a list of EIS and SEIS funds, contact details. We are doing a lot to try and bring the ecosystem together and make that smooth and make sure those connections are happening, because it's really, really important. I think this is such, in terms of part of the UK economy, this has so much potential and is already having a huge impact, and I would love to see that grow and for the people in this room to help spread the word and make sure it does that. So thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Oh, who would like to ask the first question?
Hi, thank you for that. I'm Leo. I'm going to be joining a fund next week that focuses on EIS. However,
I'm sorry, I'm struggling to hear. Do you mind coming a little bit closer? Thank you.
can you guys hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, come on.
Okay. There is just some recent stats released just this week around the graduation rate for seed companies that gets solely funded by EIS funds.
The Antler.
Yeah, the Antler report.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's something I'd like to do.
It's about 3%.
I saw it's about 3%. I think there are a few things. I think it's quite a small data set. I think there's also a big question over correlation or causation and a recognition that, not all companies being supported through the SEIS and EIS will want to go on to raise a Series A. I think that's important to recognize. And also, this is high risk. That is the design of that is why the scheme exists, to help support companies that are very high risk. I think it's something we need to look at more, but from what I've seen so far, it's quite a small data sample.
Okay.
There's an issue over correlation and causation, and it's something where I think the different sectors are important to recognize. I guess they're competing in this space as well.
Yeah, of course. Of course they are.
So it's also, there's a question over investor bias, right? So some of the data around angels is not widely published and is very hard to access. I don't know to what extent that was accounted for in the study. But also, it may be that, they were comparing it to institutional investors, right? And is it that they're picking the winners, or is it that...
Partly the main argument is that the moment that they bring, the round brings an institutional investor, then the graduation rate goes up to 20%, 25%. So it's not speaking ill about the EIS scheme or funds. It's just that the co-investment strategy seems to be working in the right direction when you want them to graduate from C to A. Yeah. Anyway, that's just thank you for that.
Question.
All right.
Any other questions? No? Did anyone have any other information they want to ask about EIS or SEIS that you want aware of? Any questions? Well, in that case, I'll say thank you very much. Thank you for your time and for listening. And do find me up if you have any.